I mean, the fundamentalists of every religion are the ones ruining every religion. The extreme right wing of every religion are always the one. And our atheist friends always say, oh, religion, all the misogyny and homophobia and violence. And I'm like, it's the far right of every religion that puts women down. The more conservative your faith is, doesn't matter, Hinduism, the more women are second class, the more you have the sex hangups about women and gay folks, the more violence is okay if my side does it. The more to the right your religion is, doesn't matter the religion, the more there's always a focus on punishment over healing. And the more there's always this persecution narrative that says we get to be as cruel as we want because bad stuff was done to us. This is true of the right wings of all. The overwhelming majority of moderate and liberal Muslims and Christians and Jews are getting along just fine all around the world, making communities, forming businesses and families together, going to school together, and genuinely not being groovy. It is the violent right-wing lunatics that get all the airtime and get all the ink. In the case of Christianity, I agree. The late 70s to the early 80s was a real turning point. You know, they had lost on civil rights. Jerry Falwell was a white supremacist who opened whites-only schools. I never knew that as a kid. I didn't know that the first time I debated him on Bill Maher. But I knew he was, pro-apartheid, but he was a segregationist. And by the late 70s, they spent all the decade trying to fight for their big cause was Jimmy Carter's IRS is looking to take tax-exempt status away from universities that are still pushing racial segregation. And it wasn't that popular. They had to find a new thing. And by 78, 5 years after Roe v. Wade, was the first time Falwell ever mentioned this word, abortion. It wasn't controversial when Roe v. Wade came down. That was the thing the Catholics cared about. Everybody else thought at the time, if God or Jesus cared, they would have mentioned it once in the entire book. But after the 78 midterms, they began to realize this could work. And so for 1980, Ronald Reagan, who had signed the most liberal abortion law in America as governor of California, now was talking about the unborn. Now, the Bible, as y'all know, is not against abortion. Jesus is against the death penalty more than once. Bible never says you can't terminate a pregnancy. It never says what the penalties are. It never says that men should force women to be pregnant against their will, or that men should force rape victims to be pregnant by their attacker. None of that's there. God asserts a fetus as property in Exodus chapter 21, and that a woman's life has more value in his eye. God gives abortion tips for pregnant, unfaithful wives in Numbers chapter 5. It's a bonkers, crazy story there. And let's talk about Passover. God's not the biggest pro-innocent children in the whole book.
Right.
So this issue of criminalizing abortion took over all of Christianity in the 1980s. That and hating the gays. And after that, they did an amazing thing. They got the followers of Jesus to vote against everything Jesus talked about by talking about abortion, which Jesus never talked about.
If you want to go a step further back into history, the biggest gay hater in the United States was the biggest closeted gay man alive in J. Edgar Hoover. So you need only look at the way certain conduct is when you think about the worst of the worst today in Randy Fine and Ted Cruz. The people that are overtly trying to show their piety are the people that I'm suspecting that they got something going on behind the scenes that they don't want the public to know about. That's just my thought.
They're the ones Jesus warns us about. I mean, Matthew 6:5, Jesus tells you, don't trust the ones praying in public to be seen. When he gives the instructions for the Our Father, he says, you got to pray in private. That's where God is. Don't do it in public to be seen. I mean, Jesus warns us about these people all over the book. They haven't read it, though. It's a useful prop, but Christian nationalism is not here to follow Jesus. They're here to fight for him, not read his teachings. And that's not new. When Donald Trump was elected, I got interviewed on all these shows saying, how could the Christians go for this? And I'm like, what, for a racist, woman-abusing game show host? How could American Christians propped up slavery? American Christians propped up segregation. American Christians burned women at the stake because someone said they were a witch. And all throughout this history, and going back to Middle Ages, I mean, you've always had this authoritarian Christianity ever since the Roman Empire took over. And it stopped being about this humble Jewish faith healer helping poor people, and it became about hierarchy and power and thou shalt not. And they began killing people. I mean, it went from being a persecuted Jewish sect to being a sect that persecuted Jews and Muslims and pagans after Rome took over. But what is important is throughout the entire history of the faith, all of these authoritarian douchebags, right? You've Columbus, the monster, Hitler, monster, these Christian nationalists, monsters. There's always been the actual Jesus followers who have stood up and resisted. When Columbus was slaughtering the Taino people, it was the Catholic priest on his boat, De las Casas, who protested the treatment of indigenous and how they were enslaving them. When the Crusades were raging, St. Francis quit the military and preached peace and walked unarmed through a war zone to negotiate with a Muslim sultan. I mean, slavery propped up by Christians, but you got Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and the Quakers. Dr. King, a Baptist, uses scripture to end American apartheid. There's an incredible history of Christian activism, right? But it's always in resistance to Christian authoritarianism. There's authoritarian Christians and there's Christ followers, and they're two totally separate groups.
Yeah, well, you know, and I had never really thought of it that clearly then from your book about, yeah, so there's the people that follow the red letters, and then there's the people that follow a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And so
it's in the Bible somewhere. It's in the Bible somewhere, right?
But they don't know what, most of these people don't know what they're talking about. And then talk a little bit and explain this, because the whole concept of Jesus was a new covenant. Point being, so then why are all of these people preaching all the rules from the Old Testament?
Yeah, well, because the woke love of woke Jesus is a little too inconvenient for people who prefer the hang-ups and bigotries of other parts of this beautiful, complicated, brutal, scary, wonderful, ugly book. I mean, the Bible's a mirror. You'll see whatever you want to see. If you want to see conquest and rape and domination and superiority, it's there. But if you want to see love and empathy and caring for the least of us, that's there too. And here's the thing, Christians aren't supposed to follow the Bible. Christians are supposed to follow Christ. So Jesus brings a new covenant. Now, the original Abrahamic covenant is, you know, God's deal, his pact with these people. He will look after, they'll be his people and they'll worship him. And there's all these laws about how to be a good person and how to worship God properly, right? 10 Commandments, Leviticus, which is like the 10 Commandments, very long terms and conditions, Deuteronomy. And some of these laws are very beautiful, and some of these laws would seem to us to be very primitive and barbaric right now. Jews have come a long way in 2,000 years, haven't we all? So then Christ comes along and he brings this new covenant. And this is what he does in the Sermon on the Mount, when he's saying, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, but I say to you, no more of that, turn the other cheek. I mean, he's literally saying, forget what religious law tells you. I'm not just here to talk about God. I am here to reinterpret the law. Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish it. I came to fulfill it, to bring the law to its required conclusion. He replaces the 10 Commandments with 2. Love God with all your mind, heart, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. But he overturns laws on divorce. I mean, under Old Testament law, you could just dump your wife anytime you were tired of her. If you no longer delighted in her, that's it. And in those days, if the wife didn't have a place to go to, that was a death sentence. It was either poverty or prostitution. Jesus changes that. And he says, you know, no, if you dump your wife for any reason other than adultery, you're an adulterer. And this was revolutionary at the time. And he says it in Matthew 19, male and female he made him, you marry your wife, right? And you got to stay with her forever. The only sexual sins he ever condemns are adultery and dumping your wife. But what do our right-wing fundamentalists do? They take that story, Matthew 19, and they choose one line. Male and female he made him. You got to marry your wife and stay. They use it against gay marriage. It's literally against straight divorce. And they support Donald Trump and oppose gay marriage. That's right. How they do it. They pick and choose. So in your, I'm being very long-winded, but with Leviticus, that's where they go for the gay hate. You shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It's an abomination. It sounds pretty airtight. You're supposed to stone them to death too. The problem is, you know, when you read it, you realize that Leviticus was God's instructions to the Hebrews trying to stay alive in the desert for 40 years after escaping bondage. And it's all about keeping your numbers up. So there's no sex on your period, no incest, no bestiality, no guys with guys. It all fits into a theme, right? And again, if you're going to use Leviticus, then you have to deny that Jesus brought a new covenant, right? He changed a lot of the Old Testament laws. And finally, Leviticus 20:10 commands you to stone adulterers to death. I don't see any of these homophobes bringing rocks to Mar-a-Lago, if you know what I'm saying. They weaponize Bible. Leviticus commands you to stone people to death for working on Saturday, for children who are gluttons or drunks. It commands you to never have tattoos. They don't follow it. They don't believe in it. But they'll weaponize one line of a book they don't believe in to hurt a minority that Jesus commands them to love. You don't need to believe in miracles to call out these blaspheming bubbas. They don't follow Jesus. And Democrats are too scared to do it. It's going to be up to us.
You know, it's kind of like all the Israeli and the Zios that are, you know, massacring and holocausting people in the name of a religion that they don't practice.
It's always the fundamentalists, and it's the same with Islam as well. Look, I despise Hamas as much as I despise the Netanyahu thugs. They're not doing what the religion says to be kind and loving and mensches to others. And fundamentalism never works. Look at it, world history. Find it, seriously, look for this. One country, one nation, one government system in history run by extreme conservative religious that was a success. Muslim, Jewish, Christian. Find me one fundamentalist regime that worked out in the end. They don't. They're spiritually dead. It's all about using religion to further authoritarianism. That's what Hitler did. That's what this guy now is trying to do. They don't believe in this book. They use it to manipulate rubes.
John, speaking of hate and where the fault line comes in regarding Christian Zionism, the Schofield Bible, which has only been in existence for just over 100 years, it does seem that a lot of the Christian Zionism, evangelism, Protestantism comes from that. Can you speak to that end and why that book has become so volatile for true Christians in this country?
I would actually say as much of it comes from the Book of Revelation and the late great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, and then these Left Behind books that have gotten people so caught up in this fervor, because it's got, in my opinion, with the evangelicals, it's got nothing to do with Israel at all. They need Israel to be there. They need Israel to be whatever it is, right? They just need Israel, because when the tribulations come in Book of Revelation, after Jesus is dead, and after Acts of the Apostles and Paul, ruins the whole thing somewhat, you get to Revelation, which is this guy, John of Patmos, who is tripping his face off on tainted shrooms in a cave and writing down his NyQuil hallucinations. And it's a fascinating read. It's very metaphorical about the persecution of early Christians. It's got nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus, but it's all about the end of the world and how you get to be better than other people because you true believers are going to be there in the rapture. Except the Bible never says the word rapture. That's made up crap. And so they need Israel because in the tribulations, when Jesus comes back and there's 1,000 years of hellfire and war on earth, the Jews, well, they're so special that half of them have to die and then half of them have to be forcibly converted to Christianity. That's why they support Israel. That's it. They don't care about Jewish people. They don't care about Muslim people. They don't care about Christian people. They don't care about religious freedom. They care about themselves, their spiritual narcissism, and that they get to go behind God's velvet rope when the shit comes down. It's got nothing to do with the teachings of Christ. And these people are addicted to this kind of like end of the world stuff. Jesus says you will not know the hour nor the day. But again, focusing on end of the world garbage is a lot easier than dealing with Jesus's inconvenient commandments to care about the dregs. How fun is that, people? Let's have fire and brimstone instead. I call these people apocaholics, and they keep getting taken by suckers year after year. If you're a Christ follower, you're not sitting around thinking about how do I get to go to the celebrity after party. You're thinking, how can I be of service to the less fortunate now? That's the job. It's the same spiritual narcissism trap they all fall into. And a lot of guys have gotten rich over this over the years.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head. Everybody back in, the mid 2000s was so caught up with Sarah Palin, but to me, it was always Michelle Bachmann. I saw this person as, not just a true believer, but in like a psychopathic kind of way. They embed this belief system. And I have no doubt that it's mostly fear-based in a lot of respects, thinking like, oh, I'm going to go and burn in hell. Well, to me, in the end, I still think it's, the school of thought with the John Hagees of the world, as Jen well knows, because you did live in San Antonio.
I live near Cornerstone.
Yeah, it's a big
much love family in San Antonio. Much love for San Antonio, but okay, yeah.
There's a lot, John. There's a lot of money in this. I mean, if you think about it, as much as I do not like who Bill Maher has become over the last several years, I'm sure you liked him yesteryear. And one of the things he always used to say, and Religulous is a fantastic documentary, he would always make fun of L. Ron Hubbard and said, hey, you want to get rich? Start a religion. One of the easiest things to do.
That's right. Listen, I've known Bill Maher for a very long time, and I always have to give him credit because he was the first person to ever encourage me to talk about religion on camera. It was on his show that I debated David Duke and Jerry Falwell when I was still in my 20s. So I will always give him credit. But
when you were back in the original show, But
the debate I always have with him is, and I've fought with him about this at his house. I'm like, you lump all religious together. It's the fundamentalists you don't like. The liberal Muslims are groovy. The liberal Jews, the ones who aren't trying to mess with people, the ones who aren't trying to dominate or force their way or steal land or resources, the ones who are out there being mensches and being loving, that's not your problem. It is the fundamentalists, the right wing of all the religions that keep ruining it for the rest of us. And I'll continue to make that point to him next time I see him, because I think it's really, really vital. Look how they're treating Zohran Mamdani. On the one hand, they want to attack him for being a liberal, and then they want to attack him for being a jihadist. No, asshole, pick a side. He's either a right-wing fundamentalist or he's a left-wing reformer. Pick one. But they don't know what words mean because they hate, and hate makes us stupid. And you can't hate. It's not allowed under Jesus's terms and conditions. Again, Jesus says the 4 groups that are going to hell. In Matthew 25, he says it. He says the ones who are going to hell are the individuals and nations who claim to follow me, but they don't take care of the poor. They don't take care of the sick. They don't welcome the stranger. And they're not kind to people in prison. He says it, and that's why Republicans never quote Jesus and never try to put Jesus's quotes on the side of a courthouse or a classroom wall.